Now, let's be honest. I hate Wyll, you hate Wyll, maybe not. Wyll hates Wyll, everybody hates Wyll. But why? It seems like many in the community find the Blade of Frontiers story to be a, well, less than thrilling one, to put it lightly. And realistically, I felt the same way as well for a while, as during my very first playthrough, I didn't sense much of a character arc developing within our interactions with him throughout much of the game. It's very much unlike the previously covered Astarion, or even other camp members like Lae'zel or Karlach, where there are new and exciting moments to engage with amongst all of the acts, which progressively shape how you plan to approach their quests along the way. With Wyll, aside from our very first moments with him in his confrontations with Karlach, there isn't much of a deviation from Run into Mizora and Find Duke Ravenguard, each of which don't feel entirely fulfilling nor impact much when it comes to his proud and level-headed nature, which would have been nice to see, culminating into a party member who honestly feels like a bit of a background character until the brief moments where he's not. That is, until Act 3. Welcome to Figuring Out Fantasy, where we'll be adventuring through the portion of Wyll's questline which saves him from not only the clutches of Zariel and Mizora, but the Baldur's Gate 3 community as well, since without it, they'd probably disown this character entirely. Though by the end of this, you might be in agreement with me that what we can experience alongside him in Act 3 even competes with the very best of what the game has to offer as a whole. If you want to see more deep dives on portions of Baldur's Gate 3 like this, be sure to like and comment below. By the time we step foot in Rivington, we've been on a road to find Wyll's father, Duke Ravenguard, for nearly the entire game, ever since our first run-in with the Flaming Fist at Joaquin's Rest. And while standing at the doorstep of the glorious Baldur's Gate, that goal is no different. But once we make our way into Worm's Crossing... Mizora? Really?
I've had enough.
Shut the f*** up, Wyll! Sorry, this is supposed to be a nice video about Wyll.
You owe your life to me. Time to end the pact.
Well, he's right, Mizora has been a damn pain in our ass through nearly the entire journey thus far, and without her help, she'd be an asset of Zariel's lost forever. But staying true to her snarky nature, she taunts our Warlock companion with information that his father resides in the throne room above, but not before reminding Wyll of what would have landed him up there in the first place, coronating the very chosen of Bane. As we can vividly remember ourselves having front row seats to the matters that took place in the core of the Mind Flayer colony, Grand Duke Ravenguard was subjected to a Mind Flayer tadpole himself, and since he's in possession of no such artifact as the Astral Prism, he's very likely to be a thrall at the Dead Three's whim. And this is where the intensity of the contents found in Wyll's questline truly starts to pick up. You could even say it started back in that very run-in with the Dead Three back at the end of Act 2, but here at Wormrock Fortress is the first instance where we felt within actual reaching distance of his father. Hell, after sitting through the grueling ceremony granting Gortash the title of Archduke, we can have a face-to-face experience with the deterioration of the once legendary noble, where he clearly shows signs of attempting to fight against the consumption of his mind, but can't fully take control of his sense of reason, falling right back into speaking delusions on the prosperity of the Grand Design. Now, even though we're smack dab where we expected ourselves to land when it comes to the end stages of this questline, the way it was built up over the course of our adventure throughout Acts 1 and 2 was underwhelming to the point where this interaction here doesn't mean much more than simply finding our objective. Wyll wasn't nearly as progressively forthcoming over our adventure as somebody like Shadowheart, who was a closed book to begin with, or even as open of a book as somebody like Lae'zel. And as we stand here in front of his father, who's clearly supposed to be an important figure in our quest alongside him so far, it doesn't seem to have the same impact as it probably should. But as a follow-up to this controversial encounter with some of the most important individuals in the city, we'll get another run-in with Mizora. Ugh. Well, at least this time, there's a bit of an ominous tone to the message she's passing on to us, making us feel like there's much more to be aware of concerning the situation at hand and the fate of the Grand Duke.
You see, Gortash has had your father relocated.
To the slaughter, the way I hear it.
Shit.
Your dad's good as dead, pup. And to think, there's no way to save him. Or is there?
It seems like we can find out more about what she speaks back at camp, but before we meet with her there, Wyll feels like he has an opportunity to finally discuss with us in full the details of his contract with Mizora and the ruler of Avernus, Zariel. Here's where Wyll's story starts to kick in full force, not only as a part of the happenings within Baldur's Gate 3, but as a piece of Faerun's historical events as well. And as a part of what he tells us here, there's a bit of extra context that needs to be laid out to couple with it. Now, I'll need you guys to back me up with any correcting or supporting information you might have, as I'm rather unfamiliar with the understandings of the D&D universe as a whole, but have done my best to research it myself and use it in conjunction with what we learned from Wyll to piece it all together. The Blade of Frontiers and his father Elder Ravenguard, like many of the characters we interact with along our journey in Baldur's Gate 3, were relevant in the lands of Faerun as heard of in pieces of literature and even full D&D adventures alike, with Elder being particularly notable in the city of Baldur's Gate, having earned the title of Grand Duke as we know. Amongst his missions was a seemingly traditional journey to the city-state of Elturel, being coaxed into traveling there by its ruler Thavius Krieg. He was under the impression that he was meeting with the priest to resolve some disputes the city had been dealing with for some time, but in reality, the beckoning of the Grand Duke was far more devious than led on. Upon arriving, Ravenguard and his men quickly realized that after an initial greeting, Krieg was nowhere to be found, as he had secretly fled the city in anticipation of something set in place for when his visitors of Baldur's Gate showed up. In a chaotic eruption, the entire city of Elturel was torn from the material plane and spirited away to the hells of Avernus, leaving nothing but a crater in its place. It would come to be found that 50 years prior, Krieg had made a pact with the Archdevil Zariel to rid his streets of vampires, in return for the city to be plunged into Avernus after the next 50 years. And so takes place the events of the incredible adventure expansion for Dungeons & Dragons, where from my best estimation, both the Duke and Elturel eventually made it out of Avernus, and he was on the road back to Baldur's Gate mere days before the game takes place. But to rewind just a little bit, according now to what Wyll has to add in this moment, Elturel's plunge into Avernus was not the only colossal event to take place during this time. Back in Baldur's Gate, there seems to have been yet another conflict with the plane of Avernus, but this time not on the end of Zariel. I have my skepticisms about it, but according to him, the Dragon Queen Tiamat had attempted to use the moment of distraction on the end of Zariel to engage in her own play for power, commanding cultists to commune on the edge of a mountainside in preparation for a siege on Baldur's Gate via the brute force of their dragon deity. With a voice in his ear calling him to action, he set out to put a stop to the summoning of a force that would surely destroy his home city, and as he arrived, he realized there was nothing he could do. That was until Mizora had manifested beside him and presented him with a choice. Pledge your soul in a pact eternal with the Archdevil Zariel, and be granted the strength to save the city of Baldur's Gate from utter devastation. And so, in what he calls not necessarily an honorable move, but the right one, he accepted the conditions and fought alongside Mizora to thwart the ritual before Tiamat could fully be summoned. But as evidence of the history before even the events of Descent into Avernus, Tiamat had already gone through her attempt to rise to power in a different instance that was thwarted by numerous factions. Well, the collective forces had likely only gone against an avatar of Tiamat, as fighting the real Tiamat would just not go well for anybody. The point is, I'm not too sure that what Wyll speaks of here was truly Tiamat attempting to take over Baldur's Gate. It just feels very unlikely to me that after all the effort gone through in the Rise of Tiamat adventure within Dungeons & Dragons I could read about, she would have been able to be manifested as a part of a quite random ritual utilizing 5 of the most rare, legendary artifacts you could get your hands on. I could be wrong, but it's my best guess that this was a checkmate set in place by Mizora, where she conjured up an imitation of a ritual to summon Tiamat and sealed Wyll's fate as a result, knowing the option he would undoubtedly choose. Regardless of the actual canonicity of what took place, it all landed Wyll welcoming his father home to an unscathed Baldur's Gate because of him, but not without a damn devil by his side. Being incapable of letting the words escape his mouth to explain what had taken place, Wyll was forced to comply as his father cast him out with one simple order: go. And that's what landed him all the way out in the Emerald Grove when we first meet him. We know he was on a hunt for Karlach as a part of Mizora's orders, but he had taken a liking to the tiefling children in the vibrant sanctuary, and chose to help them grow a bit while he searched the area for his target in his off time. Hearing the context of how he ended up in obeyance of Mizora and subsequently Zariel does certainly make us see things from a new perspective, but it honestly doesn't make the Mizora portion of his character any more interesting at this point. What I'm really interested in as a part of hearing this from Wyll is the true context of his agency in seeing this quest through to its completion as it relates to his father. It certainly took a while, but this backstory element to Wyll's life being brought to light for us now gives us what we really needed from him to connect with his character on that deeper level we were looking for. And even though I said this doesn't really do anything for me concerning the Mizora side of his conflict, I would be silly to think that this recounting of their epic clash with the cultists wasn't just metal as fuck. Now we're talking when it comes to a great, solid foundation for a bond to be created between our player character and this Warlock. Until now, there was really nothing pushing us forward in this questline, other than making general progress through the acts and engaging with what there was to support his plotline. As we heard from Mizora before Wyll divulged the history of their contract, apparently the Grand Duke was taken to, quote, the slaughter, and that he's likely as good as dead in the clutches of the Absolute's followers. Now, we'd be a fool to take her at her word, since we know there's always something she wants out of Wyll in return for his troubles, so I think we'll take her up on her offer to discuss more at camp.
No, 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 go back, I'm scared.
Oh, all right, Wyll, you have a good time with Mizora. I'm gonna get to know these other Okay, sorry, this is serious. These aren't just pieces of eye candy ordered to accompany the formalities by Mizora. A past Arcana check can reveal that these two are known as the Sisters of Justice, and that they're adjudicators of diabolical contracts and bargains. They aren't simply called upon, but only come when the Hells demand a witness. And with that context in the air, the proceedings can only be understood to be held with devious intentions. Mizora presents Wyll's contract in all of its hellish glory, describing it as being signed in blood, forged in fire, bound in bone, but not unbreakable, confirming to us that she's indeed here to stick the Blade of Frontiers with yet another cruel clause of their pact. When we had rescued Zariel's asset from the Mind Flayer colony back in Act 2, there was mention of Wyll's contract being set to end after the course of 6 months. But as we're learning here, she refused to divulge that 6 months waiting time wasn't the only condition attached to the crumpling up of their contract. There must be a sacrifice of some manner in order for the transaction to be completed.
Wyll Ravenguard, a choice is before you. Option 1. I show you the way to your father. I guarantee him no harm except that from you and your allies. And you pledge your soul to me and the Archdevil Zariel in a pact eternal. Option 2. I break your pact and you are freed from your duty. Your father dies by his enemy's hand, and Baldur's Gate loses its greatest champion. Name your sacrifice.
Mizora, you asshole!
Choose.
Going into this decision blind was one of the hardest choices I think I've had to make so far in the story. We just heard Wyll tell his tale of a life filled with conflicting opinions on whether or not selling his soul to a devil was a good idea given what he was forced to save in the moment. And here with the final nail in the coffin when it comes to the ownership of his soul as one of the dialogue choices, it feels impossible to choose that option, even though it would nearly ensure his father's safety by granting us his location on our map. After all though, we do understand that older Ravenguard isn't exactly innocent from wronging his son, given how he didn't hesitate to send him on his way out of the city at the sight of Mizora by his side. He should know his son to be a bit more honorable than to have a Cambion by his side without a good reason to back it up. Hell, he was just down in, hell, having his own run-ins with various devils and imps, and should know how they operate. So it might not feel entirely bad to let the Duke be victim to whatever Mizora, or even just Gortash and the Absolute have in mind for him. Don't forget that this would literally break Wyll free from his contract. But what evidence do we really have that the Duke's life is truly in such imminent danger? Which is yet another incredible element added to this scenario when going in blind, where we don't know what is actually going to happen to the Grand Duke at the end of the day. Mizora phrases it in a way that makes it sound like there's a guillotine being prepped for Alder right after we're done with this conversation if we break the contract. We know the influence she has and shouldn't take her words lightly, but we're talking about our good friend's life being essentially forfeit as a result, forever bound to the puppet strings operated by the Archdevil Zariel. I'd argue that if there's even the slightest chance of us making it to him before his supposed execution, or whatever's supposed to happen to him, that this is the correct choice in this moment. I mean, hey, we don't even know if we would make it to him alive if we sold Wyll's soul in exchange for his location. As while Mizora seems to be the one who's threatening here, she has mostly talked about the Absolute having fatal plans for him, not herself. Well, we have to make a decision, and I'm leaning towards breaking the contract with the quote, sacrifice being Duke Alder Ravenguard. The interaction ends with Wyll being a free man, but now we're empty-handed when it comes to where to turn to next. Though it seems that Mizora wants to hang around camp for the foreseeable future, as she hasn't quite gotten over her grudge towards the Elderbrain for having been captured and held at the clutches of its followers, and she wants to continue bestowing the Warlock with his infernal power that makes him so potent of a fighter to begin with. Well, we're certainly going to need it, as there's some serious progress to be made in terms of finding how to try and save the Duke.
Now you and I are both gonna act like there's no way we can find out where the Duke is by selling Wyll's soul, because it's a way cooler story if we break the contract and find the man ourselves.
While passing through the streets of Baldur's Gate in the instance where we broke the pact with Mizora, we'll be abruptly stopped by a trio of some pretty aggressive citizens headed by Cordula Elton, looking to have maybe more than a word with our friend Wyll. And the way they speak to him, it doesn't sound like his name is spoken of too highly in the city these days. Or to replace Cordula Elton, this could be Counselor Floric, who we would see instead if we had progressed her end of the quest up to this point and freed her from the Wormrock prison. Whoever we encounter, both courses of dialogue will follow a similar path, and I mean like almost word for word.
Lady Mizora told me everything. How you slaughtered your own father. How you crave his power.
How you mean to
make the city bow to you alone. And you alone.
It seems that Mizora herself went to poison the well with a spin of her own as to how the negotiations went with our party at camp, describing the end result as Wyll essentially killing his father himself with the decision he made, with goals of him alone carrying the Ravenguard name and, in turn, set to acquire a substantial amount of power in the city. But this is simply not the case, and by either relaying our thoughts about a hunch that the Duke is actually still alive, or convincing them through a recollection of Alder's descent into Avernus that somebody like Mizora is not to be trusted, we can put them at ease and even encourage a bit of collaboration in pursuit of saving not only Wyll's father, but the entirety of Baldur's Gate from the threat of the Absolute. Both of them will express concern for the trend that the city is heading in, describing the presence of the Absolute as leaving a darkness over the citizens living throughout, which makes sense as to why they sound so desperate and willing to lash out at the mention of who they figured to be their savior potentially being a dead man. Floric herself may be lashing out because she's had to deal with the degradation of Duke Ravenguard happening before her very eyes, but after things calm down a bit, they will come to their senses and insist that the Warlock might just be the city's only hope, considering the unique lessons taught unto him by his father.
Courage, insight, strategy, justice. I remember the lessons well. Father made me recite them every morning.
All qualities of a supposed champion, and ones that would allow an individual to awaken a legendary worm resting beneath the very foundation of Baldur's Gate. Before he had become tainted by the Absolute, Alder sent a messenger to inform some close to him of the imminent danger facing the city, and knowing he would likely become a target for the infection, he left a book that details the legend of the bronze dragon who goes by many names: the Heart of the Gate, the Waiting Storm, and most definitively, Ansur. Exploring this segment of Wyll's questline is going to be saved for a second video, as it starts to involve much more than just the Blade of Frontiers and his dilemma, stretching to the very history that Baldur's Gate was built upon, and even revealing groundbreaking secrets held by some notable characters. But with the book in hand, we know that the mission to rescue Grand Duke Ravenguard is more important than ever before, as we can assure that he'll have relevant information concerning just what awakening Ansur will entail. Now we still don't know exactly where he is, but his doom feels imminent, so we must hurry in our search. And once in the lower city, we'll likely have made it to the Water Queen's house in the far southwest corner of the city. Upon arriving and interacting with the saddened group of individuals surrounding a deceased body, we'll be tasked with avenging the misfortunate Holly Dilford, who is just another one of many who served Umber Lee, the bitch queen? That seems a bit harsh. Nonetheless, in attending the poor girl's funeral, we'll eventually be tasked with avenging her, courtesy of Alondra Grey, the flood tide of the temple. She doesn't have much to give us in terms of a lead, other than the presence of, quote, black blood and the location of her demise. All of this added up doesn't really spell out much of a conclusion as to what had happened, and it might even make us a bit more confused going forward. But luckily, around the corner, there's a couple of fishermen who can help us take the evidence we've acquired so far and finally piece it together in a way that makes sense. In speaking to the man Gowlin on the docks down the way from the Water Queen's house, we can hear a bit more of an insider's look into the happenings of Grey Harbor, and even discover that he had been involved in the recovery of the previously mentioned servant of Umber Lee, Holly Dilford. In hearing the manner in which he speaks about the process of fishing on these docks, we can glean that there might be a misunderstanding here as to just what had happened to Holly after all. As we can see from it being splattered all over the docks and gather from what Gowlin says, there seems to be an abundance of oil present in the waters of Grey Harbor, causing numerous fish to float along the surface, followed by a note from the fishermen about the fact that there were apparently some powerful waves in the area when they had found her body wrapped in their net, with the wake looking to have been headed to the building across the harbor, Flim Cargo. Perhaps the mention of a metal monster from Holly makes more sense than we had initially thought. Well, an adventurer's most irresistible sight is a set of locked doors with supposed secrets being held behind them, and once inside, we'll find the place to have been taken over by wargs who killed their goblin handler. But we're not interested in this, we eat wargs for breakfast. The center of attention here is a sneaky little hatch in the corner, leading to a little dwarf named Redhammer and his trusty little submarine. Oh. If we're curious enough to take a bit of an interrogation approach to this interaction, we can hear him complain about needing to swerve out of the way of numerous Umber Lee servants during him and his contraption Cap's trip in the submarine. And through inquiring further, he'll even admit to potentially nicking one the other day, with an overall sentiment that maybe it'll help them learn to stop flopping about in Grey Harbor. Well, I ain't no snitch, but if we're curious as to just what the purpose of this submarine truly is, we'll learn it to be a passage to the Iron Throne, a place Redhammer describes as the most secure prison in all of the realms. If there's a place where the Duke would be, that would surely be it. Well, Redhammer, you've got a deal. I won't speak a word about this if we could say, take this puppy for a spin to the Iron Throne? The followers of Umber Lee won't be too happy though if they find out we're having a little kickback with the very man who punted a submarine into one of their sisters. But the happenings at the Iron Throne don't exactly sound like an enjoyable time, as he explains that there's some bad shit going on down there. And he seems to not even want to be involved, but it sounds like it was a kill or be killed situation on his end. It turns out that this so-called Iron Throne was repurposed after initially being the source of a dark time that plagued over the city. And there's a lot of juicy secrets behind that curtain, but it's going to be saved for my grandiose video on Gortash. Well, if we think the Duke is down there, we should make haste as the environment doesn't sound like a safe one.
Aren't you the
and that didn't take long.
Digging and diving where you don't belong. And I thought we were friends. Return to the city, find Orin, and claim her Netherstone as you agreed to do. And then I will forget this transgression.
I mean, the only option in my eyes is to tell Gortash to fuck right off and proceed with our mission. But we have met Gortash at this point and have witnessed just how chaotic and dead serious he can be. There is a chance that if we defy the newly pronounced Archduke of Baldur's Gate, that any possibility of rescuing Wyll's father could be lost. But psh, what's the worst that could happen? Upon docking at the underwater prison, we'll begin to experience rumbles as a result of Gortash seemingly putting the Iron Throne on a doom clock. Water will start to flood the halls, and things like lights and other electrical fixtures will spark or fail entirely, coupled with the initiation of some rather ominous and daunting background music, if you even want to call it that. And to start off on our end, we'll hear a telepathic message from our good friend Omelum. Wait, he's down here too? Well, this just got a bit less straightforward, but luckily we can hear from him that the very man we have been in pursuit of saving is right where we thought he would be. Down here locked behind bars which paint an eerie future for not just him, but everybody else in the vicinity. Being entirely honest here, even though many have their gripes with this sequence, being that it puts you on a stressful turn timer, I think that chaos adds to the sheer intensity of the moment and leaves us in a state of true panic, which is a feeling of immersion I find it hard to come across these days in video games. And while there are many notable figures down here to save, all roads lead to the most relevant individual as it relates to why we've come down here to begin with, Grand Duke Ravenguard. He's even being held in his own oversized cell, but I don't necessarily think there would be need for such concern given how Redhammer told us that the Iron Throne is the most secure prison in all of the realms. I mean shit, I don't even think he really cares though, because he's literally willing to nuke this place right out of the ocean after we saw that he had a bit more of a watch on everything that occurs down here than we thought. Regardless, all that stands between us and rescuing Wyll's father at this point are some flooded hallways, a couple enemies here and there, and I don't want to deal with Mizora anymore. Well, a deal is a deal. We heard Mizora say pretty clearly that she would have a hand in the fate of Grand Duke Ravenguard at the end of it all. It even seems like she has direct influence on the mind of Wyll's father, similar to that command of the Absolute. She orders him to kneel as a presentation of just what kind of grasp she has on the situation. And quickly after, she summons 6 fiery spiderlings. What is this, grade school? These things have maybe 15 health points. Keep in mind though that we rescued this poor man at critical health points, so as soon as these spiders who seem to have a death wish's turn starts, they'll almost immediately annihilate our grand objective we've been trying to rescue this entire adventure. Well, take care of what's left of these spiderlings who didn't int themselves to take out the Duke though, and all that's left between Wyll's father and his freedom is... oh, yeah, this place is set to explode. Just kidding, of course we made it out alive. I surely didn't perish along with nearly everybody inside 3 or 4 times in the process of recording this video. Once back in the submersible, we'll reconvene with whoever we managed to save. Hopefully Duke Ravenguard being one of them, considering, you know, the previous 20 minutes you watched of this video so far. But we honestly won't be able to get much out of him here and now, even though the Emperor is now reaching out to him with protection from the astral prism we carry. Mostly because he's a bit shell-shocked to learn that his son touched by a devil was the one to save him after all. Sounds like he's not so talkative here because his pride has taken quite a hit, but maybe he simply wants to recollect himself back at camp so he can have a bit more of a clear mind when he approaches his son for the first time in so long.
First you cleave my heart in twain, now you shatter it to pieces.
Huh?
My son, a monster.
Whoa, 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 whoa,
Twisted
what?
beyond recognition.
Did we not just save you from the depths of Grey Harbor? From being locked behind bars only waiting for what the Absolute had planned for you? And now as soon as you have a free mind, you start speaking nonsense? being a bit more serious here, I think this is the peak of the development we can find within this questline. This interaction with the Duke here is a stark difference compared to when we had met in Gortash's throne room, where, while under the influence of the tadpole, he had nothing but warm greetings for his son. And for us to hear Wyll's side of it almost immediately afterwards, it made us curious as to just what he had meant when his dad seemed so loving just a few minutes prior. Sure, we understand the thrall-like nature somebody ends up in as a result of being tadpoled, but I couldn't have imagined the feelings towards his son to have been one of the twisted perspectives in his mind as well. So for him to come across as so oblivious to Wyll's feelings in this moment, thinking that everything his own son has done to pull him from assured death was done only as a contribution towards the ruler of Avernus, just makes him seem absolutely ungrateful towards what we had gotten him out of. I can understand how it's difficult for him to embrace his son right now, but he seems entirely unfazed that we rescued him from certain doom. Almost like he was indifferent to whether or not he made it out alive, considering what he knew was waiting for him if the darkness were to ever clear from over Baldur's Gate. A son who, in his eyes, betrayed his father and his pride as a Ravenguard. But I don't really care, to be honest, man. I don't think you know the hell I just... Maybe you do. I'm done with this joke. Well, I don't think you know what having an 8-turn timer on an exploding prison is like, Sir Ravenguard. So if you could kindly shape the fuck up, that would be appreciated. Wyll insists on sharing a telepathic memory with his father via their tadpole, and afterwards he realizes how much of an asshole he's been this entire time. And honestly, in my eyes, this sentiment of being frustrated at the Duke's words towards his son proves just how much progress has been made when it comes to an attachment to the events of Wyll's questline. The process of helping Wyll succeed in something he knows he wouldn't have been able to accomplish himself made us directly a part of the outcome, and in turn, a bit more attached to what we intended to save. Seeing older Ravenguard in the Mind Flayer colony and meeting him inside of Wormrock's fortress just didn't have that spark that I think many anticipated. But now that we were forced to make a questionable deal with the devil and travel a perilous journey into the depths of Grey Harbor towards the Iron Throne, we've become personally invested in a manner so similar to Wyll himself. I didn't feel like I could relate to his stalwart stance as the Blade of Frontiers during Acts 1 and 2, nor feel like his interactions with Mizora beyond an initial dilemma with Karlach were anything but a course of events to be spectated. But here in Act 3, there are finally the elements present to make this feel like a story that could actually end up having a solid arc, including a parent-child conflict of a quality found only in a relationship like Isabel and Ketheric Thorm. We've been through a lot so far, but that isn't quite the end of what there is to experience within this questline. If we can recall that little run-in we had with either Counselor Floric or Cordula Elton, the contents of the confrontation are clearly starting to become relevant. We had received the book titled The Legend of Ansur from either individual, but regardless, the Duke seems to have a second one lying around, propping up a tumultuous task of awakening this legendary bronze dragon that rests beneath the glorious Baldur's Gate. But that, my friends, unfortunately is going to be saved for next time. Welcome to the end screen. For those fearless adventurers who made it this far, thanks for watching. Be sure to throw a like on the video if you enjoyed, and comment your thoughts on what may be in store for our journey into the Wormway next time.